Okay, so here is a quick video on the Shay here that I did. Thought some of you might be interested to see how I have the decoder set up and how it operates. The decoder I'm using it is a TCS Wow version 4.6, and what's significant about that is that in the version 4.6, TCS came out with a feature called Chuffinity, and it's several different sets of chuff sets. I think there's like 13 total, and each one of those chuff sets has anywhere from like 3 to 1,000 different chuffs that it plays. So you don't get that real rhythmic, kind of annoying, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 type of repeating pattern. They're very different from each other in enough that you don't hear any kind of significant pattern. They also changed the chuffs under load, whereas another manufacturer, the chuffs might get just louder. These are actually different chuffs. Another feature that I do like about the TCS decoders is I like the braking feature. If you're not familiar with that, when you apply the brakes, you get 5 levels. So as you press the function 7 button, one press would be a light application. The second time you press it, it gets a little harder. And when you get up to 5, you can pretty much stop it almost instantly. F6 would then be a brake release. So if you were maybe moving up to a car and you put too much brake on and it's going to stop too soon, you could hit the F6 to release the brake, and then of course you have to press the F7 button to apply the brakes again after that. What's unique about that is that if you're using a throttle like I use here, this TCS UWT-100, is that you can actually assign these buttons quite easily to different functions. And so rather than coming down here in kind of an awkward move where you're trying to hit the F7 and the F6, I've actually reprogrammed it so these 2 arrow buttons here on the left are the brake application and then brake release. And then on the other side here, these other 2 smaller, the single chevron arrows, I've actually got those programmed to be, I think it's F10 and F11. And what's significant about those 2 functions is those are the Johnson bar. But having the Johnson bar programmed to these 2 buttons allows me to change it, for example, going down a grade where the grade is long enough that the momentum of the locomotive eventually catches up to it. And what I mean by that is that the chuffing is based off of the throttle setting. So as the locomotive is ramping, or when you set the throttle to a position and the locomotive is ramping up to that, the chuffs are real intense. And as it reaches kind of an equilibrium, the chuffs start to back off and get really soft. And it kind of acts as if the Johnson bar is moved more towards what they call this, I think it's called the top or the center, where they're using less steam. And then if you were going where you move the throttle down to where the locomotive is actually now decelerating using the decelerating momentum setting, the chuffing goes away and the locomotive goes into a rod clanking kind of state. And another nice thing on the TCS Wow decoders is one of the rod clank settings is you can change it to Shay, which is more of a driveline chatter than a clunking of rods. But what I'll do is I will take the Johnson bar and move it so the chuffing pretty much goes away the entire time down grade. And then as I start to get to the bottom of the grade, I will then change the Johnson bar setting so that the chuffs come back in. It's just really nice not to hear a locomotive chuffing real intensely going down grade, because on my railroad with a 5% downgrade, it really would be just brakes all the way down. So here's the decoder I'm using. You can see the TCS Wow version 4.6. I use it along with a KA3 Keep Alive capacitors. And then I also pair it with this Scale Sound Systems Forceful Range speaker. And where I put mine is I have my fireboxes designed to accept those speakers, and I just put them in facing down. They just sit in a socket there, and then the ash pan will cover that, and that's what actually holds the speaker in. But that's a pretty small speaker. It's you can see it's not much bigger than a decoder, but the sound it has is substantially larger and more full sounding than any speaker I've heard. So if we put this locomotive in operation, I'll just go through some of the sounds here. So of course the whistle, that's a pop valve going off, which is a pretty nice sounding pop valve. We can hear it kind of sizzling away. And you can hear it close. It's not just a hiss sound that just comes on and goes away. It actually has some different sounds in it too. I don't know if you could hear it, but it was the sound of the valve was varying throughout the entire sound. Then the bell. Now the bell has a strange feature that when you turn the bell off, some of the different bells you can hear, I've turned it off, they kind of fade out. And sometimes they'll kind of clatter out. They're not just an on and off like other decoders might be. And there you can hear the injector came on. But what's really nice about the whistles on here, and depending on which ones you pick, some are better than others. There's a lot of them, but if you listen, they have a lot of reverb on them, which really gives you the sound of it being, outside. Because if you've ever heard a steam whistle go off, they echo throughout the entire area. And especially for me, it's important because I'm going to be in a mountainous area, and they would be kind of echoing off the different hills and stuff. So if I blow the whistle, you can hear that trailing of the reverb is really nice. And again, some of them are different than others. They do have a feature where you can do a quill, which and those are pretty nice because it kind of breaks up. That was so that was one long quill. What you can do though with them is I've learned to kind of use the quill as where if you so the quill is an F4, and once you initiate it, if you don't want it to go as long as that one just did, you can kind of play with this button, pick a spot where it dies, and then hit the other whistle, and then you can just cut it off. So you can kind of get good at playing with the quill a little bit to break it up a bit. So one other thing I'm going to point out here is on the UWT-100, it has this little up arrow here, and if you look, you can see it added a little 1 here in the corner. And what that means is all the function buttons now have a 1 in front of them. So for example, 1 would be 11, and 2 would be 12. And if you go down here to the 5, which would be F15, if you listen to the locomotive, it's going to change what they call the momentum to either a switching momentum or a mainline momentum.
Switching momentum.
So right now it's in what's called switching momentum. And what that means is that it has a different set of CVs it uses for the momentum. And the momentum on those is very short. So when I just roll up on the throttle wheel, you'll see the locomotive takes off. And then if I turn this off, it stops right away. So you can kind of operate it as you would just any other locomotive. Now, if you want to put it in what's called mainline momentum, now it has a really long starting momentum and an even longer decelerating momentum. And that's where that braking feature comes in. So if I start this up now, you'll see that it doesn't initiate right away. And so as I get the locomotive rolling and I cut the throttle off, now you can hear that driveline clatter. And then to get it to stop, I have to initiate the brake feature. So I'm going to hit my brake button. And the locomotive comes to a stop. Now if I reverse direction, same thing. I'll get it moving up. Cut the throttle, hit the brake. What's really great about these TCS decoders too is all the different brake sounds. They don't just have one brake sound. They just have a whole bunch of different ones that it'll use at different points and mix them up. And so you get a lot of unique variety with the brakes. Sometimes it's just a squeal, sometimes it's a groan and a clatter. And it just has that sound of, the machinery just kind of working and vibrating and trying to stop the load or the weight of the train. So one of the fun features about using the mainline momentum is actually trying to operate with the brakes. So if I want to try to make a couple to a car here, I'm going to have to decelerate before I come to the car, and then as it's coasting along, make a judgment call on how much brakes I need to apply to get the locomotive to couple to the car without smashing into it or stopping short. And stopping short's fine because I can just release the brakes and coast a little bit farther in or throttle up to it to move it. But I really enjoy the challenge of trying to get a really nice soft couple. So we'll back this locomotive up a little bit so I can get a little bit of a running start to simulate maybe a longer run here. Come to a stop. And now I'm going to switch direction here and we'll just kind of get a little bit of a running start here. So I'm going to cut the throttle. That maybe might be a little too soon, so I'll give it a little more throttle. Cut the throttle again, and now I'll start to do the brakes. So that was a really nice couple. Now if I'm going to be going at a faster speed here, and you can hear the chuffing gets pretty intense there, so I can back off that, be into a nice coast there. And now I'll hit the brakes 5 times. And you can see it pretty much stopped on a dime. So it is really nice to be able to use that feature since you do have the advantage of being able to change it as needed. So if I'm shoving this car back, and now I'm going to coast it, I can apply a little bit of brakes to slow it. Now I just release the brakes and it goes back to coasting at a normal deceleration, and then I'll brake it again. If you would like to have your throttle have the brakes be on this side and the Johnson bar be over here, it's really easy on these TCS decoders to change that. You just go hit these 3 bars here to go into the programming menu. You go down to settings. So that's right there. Hit select. Go into throttle settings again. Hit select. Go into change buttons. Find the picture of the button you want to change. So in this case, there's these double chevrons. So I'll go down until I find the double chevron. So there's a double chevron up, and then there would be the double chevron down. So if I want to change button 7, they call it, which is this one here, then I would just hit select again. And then the only option I have here is common functions. So I'll select that again. And here are all my choices I can change that button to. And so right now I have it set to F7 because it has an asterisk. If I wanted to be set to 6, I could just select that. And now you can see if I go back that the button here, I'll go back into it again, you can see is set to F6. Now that would be a brake release, and I have the double up set to that, so I'm going to go back and set it back. So there's F7, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to select that. So now F7 is back to where it was, and then when you're done doing your button programming, you can just hit escape and go back to the beginning, and now you're back. And so that's how quickly you can change the function of these buttons. So there you go. That's just kind of one of the fun things I'm doing here with these Shays and these TCS products. Again, the TCS UWT-100 is really convenient for doing these because of the programming on the buttons and the way the decoders operate. It almost operates like kind of a prototype fashion where you get a little bit more operator choices than just slowing down and stopping. Now, if you get an operator, of course, that just doesn't want to do that, or you get bored of that, it's real easy just to
Switching momentum.
change it, and now you're back to just being normal, what I'd call more of a traditional operating method of just using the knob.